When I was 11 years old, the Nazis came to our town and they burned the whole town. There we were put in a ghetto. Within a few weeks, the first massacre occurred. I saw a woman holding a baby and breastfeeding while everybody was pushing around. And I saw a Nazi came in with a bayonet and perched the baby from the bosom of the mother and threw it like a football. I couldn't believe my eyes what I see. And then next to me was standing man. They shoot him right in front of me. I didn't know what to do with myself.
Well, my name is Leon Chameides, and I will be in a month, 87 years of age. And I was born in southwestern Poland, a very large city by the name of Katowice. I was 4 years of age when the Second World War broke out on September 1st, 1939, and of course there was tremendous anti-Semitism and tremendous anti-Jewish riots. And my first and clearest memory of that era is an anti-Jewish pogrom. And I remember distinctly the Jews being forced to wash the cobblestones with toothbrushes. At the end of the day, we found our grandmother had been beaten and her face was all bloodied, teeth were knocked out. I was hidden with my mother in a cellar, and I remember that as a frightening time because we could hear shots and screams.
I was born in Cologne, Germany in 1935, but in 1936 my family, as well as two sets of grandparents, moved from Cologne to Amsterdam, Holland. At that time I was 5 years old, and things started to change. We had to wear the yellow star on the left side on our outer clothing. I had to go to a Jewish school. Jews couldn't go out of the house after 8 o'clock, and life became restricted.
My name is Jessica Koyner, and I'm 18 years old. My first experience with anti-Semitism was my freshman year. It was a magnet program focused on global studies. I was going to learn Arabic. It was an hour away from my house, and I really, really loved the school. For the first time in my life, I was happy to wake up at 5 a.m. I was in the pit orchestra for Mamma Mia. I was really, really excited and happy to be there and learning. And then it was assessment day, so the teacher was outside in the hallway personally assessing students on Arabic speaking skills. And another student came up to me and started saying things that hurt me. He called me a kike. And in the moment, I don't think he knew what the word meant or even the magnitude of it.
I was in a club for my school. No teacher was present, no more than 7 kids in the classroom. And 2 students had suggested we play an online game. So I logged onto my phone and I started typing in my username that I would use. And I thought nothing of the unusual names that started popping up on my screen, as people often use unusual names online. And then 2 usernames popped up on my screen that shocked me. I was at a loss for words. I saw 2 usernames that read Jews suck and evil Jews.
And then he followed up with statements of Holocaust denial, saying things like, if it was really 6 million, then it wasn't enough, and started saying things that hurt me. And he drew a swastika on my notebook. And then over the following weeks, the harassment continued, escalated to more verbal and physical harassment as well. And I finally cracked, and I told administration.
I knew I needed to do something, and I stood up and I said, whose usernames are these? And 2 hands shot immediately into the air, and laughter rang out in the room. And I said, do you think this is some kind of joke? And they did, and they laughed. And I so valued my Jewish identity, I was nervous to tell my parents because I thought that I had not done enough, and it would appear that I wasn't as strong of a Jewish person that they'd raised me to be, and I was nervous to tell them, but I decided I needed to tell them. I needed their support.
He received a 2-day in-school suspension. It was at that time that he then posted on one of his social media stories that he had a gun and that he could and would kill me. I couldn't talk to any of my friends because he would corner me. I had to always be in a room with teachers, and everything I once loved about the school, everything I once loved about learning seemed kind of gone for me, and that included my religion and who I was. It felt very, very scary, and although I know that I'm a proud Jewish woman today, in the moment, I felt like I was absolutely nothing, and as soon as I let those words lose power over me, I became a lot happier.
My guidance counselor said that no further action could be taken because the usernames were not tied to any student identity, even though I had seen the students, acknowledge and own up to their usage of those names. That was the only evidence they had. So no further action could be taken besides speaking to the students. Seeing a friend of mine drop a quarter on the ground, and I've heard another student say, "Oh, well, let the Jew pick it up." I've heard, what's the difference between a Boy Scout and a Jew? The Boy Scouts come back from the camps. It is incredibly hard to stand up to peers and friends, but something that I've learned is if we want anything to change, we need to seek discomfort because culture doesn't change when we are comfortable. So my advice would be to not be afraid of discomfort because that's ultimately how we create change.
We were not so lucky. In 1940, the Germans invaded Holland and Holland capitulated. They were not prepared. I spent 9 months in Theresienstadt. Theresienstadt was a concentration camp in Czechoslovakia. We were transported by cattle car from Westerbork to Theresienstadt. We were 2 to 3 days in that car, in the cattle car, maybe a little water, but basically it was pretty bad. There was no food, and in the middle of the cattle car was an old beer crate or wine barrel, which had to be used as a toilet. Theresienstadt was much, much more severe than Westerbork. I stayed with my younger brother and my mother in the one barrack, and my father was at the other end of the camp in the men's barrack.
And at some point, the cellar door opened, the shaft of light came in, and there were boots on the cellar stairs, and we were found and we were hauled out. And that there was really no chance of survival. And children were particularly vulnerable because children were mouths to feed and non-productive.
One was standing on a little podium, a Nazi dressed in some sort of special guy with his finger pointing like this to the left and to the right. And I watched him that all the elderly and the children were sent one way, which means to death. I realized the only way that I can survive was to ask somebody to take me as their son. Then at the end, I saw a lady with 2 children. One, a girl, was 5 years old and one was 7 years old. And I went over, I saw that she's holding a certificate, she's a nurse. So I came to this lady and I said, "Would you take me as your son?" And she looked at me with some charitable face and she said, "If they let me live with 2 children, maybe they let me live with 3 children. Hold on to my dress." I hold on to her dress. She went over to the guy with the finger, to the Nazi, and he pointed, which means to life.
My father was sent as a part of a delegation of, I think, 2 rabbis to meet with Sheptytsky in order to see whether he would be willing to hide the Torah scrolls. In the course of that discussion, he asked about the families of the two rabbis, and my father asked him whether he would be willing to hide his two sons. I remember distinctly the moment I realized that I was going to be left there. And you have to understand that when we entered the premises of the Archbishop, we entered a different world. There was a world with carpets, clean, smell of incense in the air, icons on the wall. It was a totally foreign world.
Anti-Semitism, for me personally, was pretty from the outset. Interestingly enough, I came to Judaism by conversion, and it was choice, not through marriage. It was solely a decision on how I felt about the faith and what it meant to me. Initially, in my conversion, when individuals that I knew heard I converted, some of the dim lights, if you will, well, one was a woman saying to me, well, I heard you converted to Judaism. And I said, yeah, that's correct. I said, yeah, it was for a spiritual decision, no pressure. It's something I really feel comfortable with. And she said, well, even though you're a Jew now, I'll still love you. And she said, well, you know what I mean. And I said, yeah, okay, I guess I do. Some of the other ones were among people that I considered as friends. The jokes started piling out. Dean, now that you're a Jew, so you won't be paying for anything. Or, I'm going to buy a car. I want to bring you along because you're a Jew and I'll get a better deal. And at that point in time, this was all new to me, but I still felt there was an element of seriousness behind it. It was just, it was as if suddenly the fact that I became a Jew, there was a shift. Dean Festa, Italian. This is a story I tell all the time. I'm on an elevator at work. We're not talking ancient history here, all right? I'm on the phone, rudimentary Hebrew. Shalom, shalom, manishma, tov, tov, blah, blah, blah. Woman on the elevator with me, Dean, what was that? Hebrew. You speak Hebrew? That's the Jewish language, right? I said, yeah. I said, I'm Jewish. You're a Jew? Yeah. Italians are Jews? Yeah, Italians can be Jews. There's all kinds of Jews. Walks to the end of the elevator. Before it closes, turns around and points a finger and says, you people killed Christ. You people killed Christ, and walks away. I'm at a road race, and I'm talking to a guy, and we run the race. He did great. And I said, go up to him, hey, I think he came in 5th or 6th. And I said, great job. And I wear a Star David, and it came out. And he looked at it, and he said, oh, you're Jewish. I said, yeah. He said, so am I, but that's between us. And that breaks my heart. You know, when I talk to someone about anti-Semitism and they say, well, I think you're over-exaggerating a little bit, a fellow Jew. And then in the same sentence they'll say, yeah, but, well, kinda. I guess when my daughter goes out, I tell her not to wear anything that identifies her as Jewish. 2022 in America. Don't identify yourself because you're Jewish, so you could be at risk. And this isn't high-risk areas. These are suburban Connecticut.
My father worked in a root cellar. Root cellar being where the vegetables which were grown were stored underground to keep fresh. One day, the officer who was in charge of that told my father and said, why don't you help yourself? I'm going to go get a cigarette. And at that point, my father wore old-fashioned ski pants, which were very bulgy at the bottom. And he stuffed potatoes, turnips, and what have you in his pants, walked that way through the camp and delivered it to my mother. The amazing part is that soldier knew my father. He used to be, before the war, the head waiter in a hotel in Germany. My father loved good food and often went to the hotel to eat and left a very good tip. And this soldier remembered my father. So that I find a very, very stirring moment. We were liberated by the Russians, and my father, who was always very careful, said, "No, you're not going out." And we went into the cellar of the barracks and waited until we didn't hear any more screaming and gun shooting, and only came out after it was quiet.
So I was taken to a monastery, a very famous monastery, which actually was built, I think, in the 14th century. We went by tram car and then by train. And on the way in the tram car, a German Gestapo officer sat down next to me, and he thought I was very cute, and he started to pinch my cheeks and talk to me. And of course, Reverend Marco, Brother Marco, was terribly scared because I spoke German, and if I had indicated in any way that I understood what he said, he would know I was not a Ukrainian child. But I didn't. I pretended I didn't understand him, and so we made our way, and we walked the last about 1.5 miles and came to the monastery. And I spent the next 2 years in that monastery until we were liberated by the Soviets in 1944. And the first thing I was taught was a new name. I was given the name of Levko Chaminsky, and I had to repeat it over and over again to myself in order to remember it, so that if I was suddenly woken up in the middle of the night and I was asked my name, I wouldn't give my real name. And then I had to learn how to be a 7-year-old Ukrainian Catholic. I had to learn how to cross myself. Instead of saying the prayers that I was familiar with, the Shema prayer and other prayers, I suddenly had to learn Oiche Nash, which is Our Father, or Bohorodze Divo, which is the Ukrainian version of Ave Maria.
You have to learn how to deal with the situation, especially when you're by yourself. And that is our problem. The problem is, if people are united together, they can do many things. When you're by yourself, you're very little. It reminds me, if one person faces a lion, he has no chance. But when 10 people face a lion, we have a chance. And that is the little story about how we people can survive with anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism will always be there unless we teach people how to act to one another with justice. And that's the problem, when there's no justice in the world. Right now, I'm 92 years old. By learning, by studying the right things, then you'll be able to help others.
You have to accept everybody. Just because somebody is black or has curly hair or has eyes on a slant or speaks a different language or eat different food, that is no reason not to befriend them. You have to accept them as they are.
So, all in all, as a Holocaust survivor, I feel that, and I pray, that this thing should never happen again. Because if it does happen, I think people, God forbid, should react in every possible way not to happen. That's why we need people to be united, to be educated, and to act. Not just to sit and talk and do nothing about it.
You only hurt yourself if you be so negative that you can't forget. Forgive is a different thing, okay? But forgetting, trying not to think about it, living on in your daily life, I think you have to let go.